Today we're talking about something near and dear to my heart. The Fat Maker. No, I'm kidding. Although, the design is very solid. Maybe we'll revisit the Pillsbury Doughboy from Hell later, but today I wanted to discuss the sliders that we caught a quick glimpse of in the Xbox Direct trailer. Now, as someone was so nice to point out to me, we actually didn't see the entire depth of the slider adjustments, so the customization and the amount of replayability is almost completely left up to the individual person's discretion, which I would say is a great thing. Now, personally speaking, when I first saw these sliders, I actually immediately got excited for it because, as a reference to the last Doom game, Doom Eternal, for those that didn't play that game or didn't remember, that game's philosophy was all about moving first, shooting second. The acrobatics were crazy, you always wanted to be up in the air. It became a mini game in of itself. You wanted to be as airborne as much as you could, utilize your meat hook, and become a flying ball of death and destruction. And as Hugo Martin used to put it, behind the scenes, it was all about how much faster can they make the race car, that being the Doomslayer, and how much bigger and more complex can they make the racetrack to be accommodating for the Doomslayer. The racetrack, in this analogy, being the arenas and the way that you're traversing the environment. As time went on, that speed and the level of skill that someone was able to acquire in terms of being airborne and taking advantage of the meat hook became a challenge in of itself. And then over time, as people started perfecting the mechanics within Doom Eternal, they started to realize that the speed of the game was also dependent on your frame rate. So the higher your frame rate and the better you were at essentially catapulting yourself with the meat hook, you can fly across an entire, not just arena, but skip entire sections of missions altogether. And theoretically speaking, by doing that, people were essentially pressing as far down on that gas pedal to push the race car to the absolute limits. It became exhilarating. And when you manage to do that inside a tight arena on a higher difficulty, then we're entering a different field. It's a skill set within a skill set that your hardware allows you to achieve. Console players, accordingly, were not able to experience that. On the PlayStation 4, originally the game was locked at 60 FPS, and then when the PlayStation 5 version came out, the frame rate was able to be doubled to 120. So a year after Doom Eternal's initial release, the console was getting up there, but at the end of the day, our racetrack was still very much tamed by comparison. So when I immediately saw the sliders, that's the first thing that came to my mind. We're able to level the playing field across all platforms. Because while I'm seeing the argument be brought up, you can lower the speed of particularly the game and couple that with your parry window, your enemy projectile speed, enemy aggression, you're essentially making the entire game a cakewalk. Meanwhile, I'm thinking the other way around, maxing out the game speed. If you want to adjust those parry windows or enemy aggression or projectile speed lower, then you're basically just customizing your own power fantasy. And considering Doom the Dark Ages takes place during the events described to us in the Slayer Testaments of 2016, then you are building your own legend. How are you going to tell me that isn't badass? It'll add replay value beyond measure by itself, and the level of creativity this community showed years ago was astonishing. Now, we have tools to tailor our own experience, and on top of that, it does fix another problem: balance. During Doom Eternal, id Software spent a crazy amount of time tweaking and perfecting the values of demons, and difficulty to strike the perfect balance for rookies and experienced players alike. I remember specifically Hugo mentioning the Arachnotron's turret being a problem. The Arachnotron was a demon that was introduced early into Doom Eternal's enemy roster, and its turret fired too often and much too accurately. It was a demon that could be a pushover for experienced players, but destroy the experience of new or less experienced players from the start. Same thing applied to the Caco demon. It flew too fast and recovered too quickly from its attacks for new players to fairly fight them. But when you're dealing with a game that has a high skill ceiling that has been out for quite some time, and your player base is experienced with these demons for the most part, how can you properly balance two staples in the enemy roster in a way where they become useless to everybody that aren't newcomers? And I remember it would spend weeks, sometimes months, perfecting these tweaks. Hugo would come out, announce the big news that changes are coming, and two things would happen. One, there'd be a little bit of rumblings and pushback as to why these changes are coming, why they need to be tweaked, and better yet, why is it happening now? You know, I touched on this in the previous video. COVID was a big problem with Doom Eternal's post-launch content. It affected updates, it affected new content drops, it affected everything after the game was officially shipped. And so when you have these new players constantly coming in, and id Software watching that data behind the scenes on the success rate with demons and how often and how long people were actually playing the game, it's very difficult to, in a timely manner, address the problems that seem to be coming up on the daily from the side of the game that the average player never got to see, right? It's all information id Software was actively collecting. So as these problems arose, id Software tried their best to tackle it, but because they're all working from home, they got to send information and talk to each other over vast distances. By the time these updates were pushed out, there was a strong sense of disconnect. Why is it coming now? Why are you prioritizing this over new content? Where's the DLC? Where's master levels? So on and so forth. They aren't listening, and it's just noise drowning out the fact that they were listening, but due to the infrastructure outside of their control to improve, they got a slap to the hand being extended to help everyone. The sliders fix the drain on developer resources as far as I'm concerned. It also makes sure that its balancing tweaks don't affect the entire playing field. If they're making adjustments for newcomers and the game's already 1, 2, 3 months out, their changes aren't going to disrupt the established consensus unless it's a drastic change and it's something that I think everyone would have to agree needs to be adjusted with a particular demon or category of demons, but I think that'll be a very unique case. All things considered, I think it's a very positive addition. With Doom the Dark Ages hitting Game Pass day one, there will be a whole new level of newcomers to the series. And on that note, I want to highlight a quote from Hugo that is quite long, truthfully, but it addresses, I think in hindsight, the look changes from 2016 Eternal and Dark Ages, as well as the differences in gameplay and, for the sake of this video, features.
Games are relevant now for a really long time. And oftentimes when you have a series of games that come out, it's important to make each of those stand on its own. So that way, if someone decides to dive into your series and they're late to the party, they don't grow bored of the experience by the second one because it's just kind of more of the same. So we wanted those two games, Eternal in 2016, to stand on their own. So it was a conscious decision to visually make it distinct. But still on brand. And what we feel is that all of Doom in the reboot is really a celebration of the entirety of the brand of Doom. Doom, the brand, is 1993 Doom, it's Doom 2, it's Doom 64, it's Doom 3, which has a very distinct look. And I would say that Doom 2016 borrows not so much of the fiction of Doom 3, but a good amount of the visuals. With Eternal, we looked at the brand, and as we started to develop the gameplay side of it and try to, improve the experience, make it more engaging, make it something that you wanted to play multiple times and on higher difficulties. The engagement around Eternal, as we see from the numbers, more people are playing Doom longer and on higher difficulties with subsequent playthroughs than they ever did on 2016. That's all we wanted.